My name is Rob, and I never thought I'd be standing in court facing my own son. But when Liam called me out of the blue and said, "Dad, you're paying our mortgage, it's your responsibility," something in me snapped. For years, I gave him everything: his tuition, his wedding, his start in life. But that day, I realized love had been turned into leverage. Then came the lawsuit, $600,000. And worse, the world believed them. My name dragged through the mud, my own child painting me as the villain. But they forgot who raised them, and what a quiet man can do when pushed too far. Before we dive into this story, let me ask you, where are you watching from, and how old are you? Hit subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked so you won't miss what happens next. The phone buzzed on my kitchen counter, vibrating against a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. I didn't even have to look. I knew it was Liam. He had a habit of calling at odd hours, always with that same upbeat tone, like nothing bad could ever touch him. I wiped my hands on a dish towel rough from too many washes and picked up. "Hey, Dad," he said, loud and cheerful, like he was about to share good news. "You won't believe it, we just closed on the penthouse. Downtown Boston, floor-to-ceiling windows, top floor, full skyline view. It's everything we ever dreamed of." Sophie's ecstatic. I smiled, faintly happy for him, though I couldn't help but glance around my own house. My modest split-level creaked as the wind pressed snow against its siding, paint peeling near the windows, carpet worn from years of foot traffic. But still it was mine, and it held memories Liam had long outgrown. "That's great, son," I said, genuinely proud. "Sounds like a real milestone." There was a pause. Then his voice shifted, quieter, smoother. "So we were thinking, maybe we'll swing by this weekend. Celebrate a little. Do something special together." I frowned. Special, like what he laughed, but it sounded practiced, like he was rehearsing the next line in his head. "Oh, you'll figure it out. You always do, Dad. You always come through." And then just like that, he hung up. No room for questions. No chance to respond. I stood there for a few seconds, the phone still in my hand, the screen gone dark. I didn't like the tone in his voice. That wasn't my Liam. Or maybe it was just a part of him I hadn't wanted to see before. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, my knees cracking on the way down. Across the room, a photo of Liam as a kid sat on a shelf, the glass slightly cracked from when I dropped it during spring cleaning. In it, he was 10 years old, smiling wide with his arms around my neck. I stared at it until the image blurred. I had given that boy everything I could. I worked overtime for his tuition. I helped him buy his first car. I paid for half his wedding. Every dollar I'd saved from late nights at the engineering firm went to giving him the life I never had. But lately, gratitude felt like a distant memory. The house felt smaller than usual. Or maybe I just felt older. I made a cup of tea to warm my hands, but it tasted bitter. My gut told me something was wrong, something deeper than the words he'd said. I tried brushing it off, telling myself I was overthinking things. Liam was flashy, sure, but he wasn't cruel. And yet that voice, that casual demand for something special, clung to me like a draft under the door. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the beginning of a storm that would turn my life upside down. 3 days after the call, I heard the crunch of tires on fresh snow outside. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a brief moment I hoped it was a neighbor needing help with their driveway, or maybe Ellen dropping off her usual batch of lemon bars. But when I looked through the front window, I saw Liam's car pull in, its sleek black body glistening with frost. My stomach knotted. I set my mug down, the tea sloshing over the rim. My hands instinctively wiped the counter one last time, trying to make things look decent. I hadn't seen him in months, and he didn't say he was actually coming. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to a gust of icy air and a polished scene straight from a lifestyle magazine. Liam stood tall in a wool coat, smiling like nothing in the world could touch him. Behind him, Sophie followed with her signature click of heels, her posture precise, her expression unreadable. Her lipstick matched the color of her nails, blood red. "Dad," Liam said, stepping inside, brushing snow off his collar. "House looks the same." His eyes darted around the room, taking silent inventory of the couch, the old bookshelf, the framed family photos still on the wall. Sophie said nothing, just smoothed her coat, and stood near the fireplace like it was beneath her. "Come in," I said, voice tight. "Can I get you coffee, tea?" "No thanks," Sophie replied. Her smile slight cold. "We won't be long." Liam sank into the couch like he owned it, his arms sprawled out as if to claim the space. I sat across from them, the old coffee table between us. Its surface was scratched and scuffed from years of use, but I'd never cared. It had held birthday cakes, spilled juice, late-night talks. It was solid, real. "So tell me about the penthouse," I said. "Sounds like a big step." Liam grinned. "Oh, it's amazing. Marble counters, smart lights, views to die for. Sophie's already planning a housewarming." She nodded, then reached down and slid her purse onto her lap. That's when I noticed her hand dipping inside her movements, calculated. She pulled out a glossy folder and placed it carefully on the table. The logo of a well-known bank shimmered in the light. "We actually wanted to talk to you about something, Rob," she said, her voice clipped, professional. Liam straightened, leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine. "It's the mortgage, Dad," he said. "It's a lot to handle. We figured you'd help us out. You've always helped us." My eyes shifted from him to the folder, then back. "Help you?" How Sophie's smile tightened. "We assumed you'd take care of the payments. It's your responsibility. You've always been our support system." I stared at them, too stunned to speak. My own son sitting in my house asking me to cover a mortgage I didn't sign, didn't agree to, didn't even know about until this moment. The folder sat on the table like a loaded gun. I didn't open it. I couldn't. My hands were clenched so tight the veins stood up on my skin. Liam leaned in as if trying to close the deal. "Look, Dad, I know it's a big ask, but you've always come through. College, the wedding, my first car. You never let me fall." I didn't answer. I was still stuck on that one word Sophie had used, responsibility. As if raising him, sacrificing decades of my life wasn't enough. As if they were entitled to more. Sophie crossed her legs, smoothing her skirt. "Rob, we assumed you'd want to help. You know we're building a future. It's not like you're still working. Your mortgage is paid, you live comfortably." Her voice was soft, but it carried an edge like a knife wrapped in silk. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every year in my knees. "You're asking me to pay for your apartment." "It's not just an apartment," Liam shot back. "It's our home. Our future. And yes, we figured you'd take care of it. You figured wrong." I said, my voice low. "I've given you everything. And this is beyond that. This isn't help. This is expectation. Entitlement." Liam's expression twisted. "You're making a mistake. You want us to lose that place after everything you've done for us." "You mean everything I've done for you," I corrected. "And I didn't do it so you could throw your responsibilities onto me every time life gets expensive." Sophie stood, brushing invisible lint from her coat. "Think about it, Rob. We'd hate for this to get messy." She nodded at the folder, its corners catching the light like warning flares. Liam followed her, his jaw tight. "Don't say we didn't give you the chance, Dad. You always say family comes first. Let's see if you meant it." The front door slammed behind them, the sound echoing through the hallway like thunder. I stood frozen in place, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The folder remained on the table, unopened, glowing in the lamplight like a threat. I sat back down slowly, my legs trembling. My pulse thudded in my ears. How had we gotten here? When did love become leverage? I looked around my house, quiet, worn, but honest. Everything in it earned, every crack in the wall, a story, every scuff on the floor, a memory. And here they were treating me like a walking ATM, a fallback plan, a financial punching bag. I reached for the folder, but stopped short. I wasn't ready to see what was inside. My mind raced, remembering birthdays, school pickups, scraped knees, college move-in day. I remembered the way Liam cried when his dog died, how I held him all night. Where had that boy gone? I stood again, restless, pacing the living room, like a man trying to outrun his own reflection. The air felt thick. My home didn't feel like mine, not with that folder sitting there. I walked to the hallway, picked up the cracked photo frame from the shelf, stared at Liam's 10-year-old grin, and whispered to the silence, "What happened to you?" I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the folder, heard Sophie's voice, felt Liam's disappointment wrap around my throat like a noose. By morning, I hadn't touched the paperwork, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I made coffee out of habit, but it tasted like ash. I stared at the snow-covered yard as steam rose from my mug, but the world outside felt as cold as everything inside me. I checked my phone instinctively, looking for a message that might redeem the previous evening, a simple "sorry, Dad," or maybe a half-hearted "we shouldn't have pushed." But instead, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Sophie had posted, publicly. Her account, which she kept pristine and curated like a fashion magazine, now featured a cryptic photo of the penthouse window with a caption that read, "Some people forget family when money's involved." A winking emoji followed it as if betrayal was something clever. My hands trembled. My chest tightened. I scrolled down, and there it was. Liam had commented beneath it. "Guess Dad's too selfish to help us build a future." His words seared into me, sharp and personal. Then came the floodlikes comments, strangers, neighbors. People I hadn't spoken to in years chimed in. "Ungrateful old man," one wrote. "Parents like that shouldn't have kids," another added. A former co-worker I hadn't seen since retirement shared it with a thumbs-down emoji. They had turned me into a villain, online, publicly, before I even had the chance to respond, before I could open my mouth to explain. My hand gripped the edge of the table, the wood creaking under the pressure. I wasn't just hurt, I was humiliated. I dropped the phone, let it bounce off the couch, and walked to the kitchen where the folder still sat. I stared at it as though it could answer back, but it didn't. It just sat there, a silent witness to the war that had begun. I was no longer dealing with family drama. This was a full-blown character assassination. I needed air. I needed space to think. I pulled on my coat, grabbed my keys, and opened the door only to be met with a knock from the other side. I blinked. Ellen stood there, snow clinging to her wool cap, a plate of cookies in her gloved hands. "Rob," she said, stepping inside without waiting. "I saw that nonsense online. Those two parading their lies like they're the victims. It's disgusting." I tried to speak, but she held up a hand. "You don't need to defend yourself to me. I know who you are, and I'm not the only one." I shut the door behind her, the cold lingering in the hall. For the first time in days, I didn't feel completely alone. I sat down at the table while Ellen placed the cookies beside the folder. "They've poked the wrong bear," she said, removing her gloves. "And I've got a friend who knows how to dig deep, really deep." Her eyes met mine. "Rob, let's fight back." Ellen's words hung in the air, weighty and unexpected. I looked at her, really looked at the fire in her eyes, the steadiness in her voice. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering backup. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and walked to the hallway closet. There, behind an old winter coat and a box of broken Christmas lights, sat an old dresser I hadn't opened in years. I crouched, my knees popping, and yanked open the bottom drawer. Dust rose like a warning, but I didn't stop. My fingers brushed across old receipts, contracts, loan agreements. Buried in the mess were the records of every time Liam had come to me for help. The checks I'd written, the loans I'd co-signed, the promises scribbled in his handwriting. "Thanks, Dad. I'll pay you back next month." Lies, all of them. But now they were evidence. I carried the folder back into the kitchen and laid it on the table beside the one Sophie had left behind. Ellen didn't flinch. She picked it up, flipped through a few pages, and nodded. "This is good. This is a start." She pulled out her phone and began typing. "My friend's name is Tom. He used to audit corporations, real bloodhound with numbers. He's retired now, but he still helps out when people get screwed. I'll call him tonight." I sat down, my hands resting on my thighs, my head swimming. I don't even know what I'm looking for, Ellen. I signed things for Liam years ago thinking they were business papers. What if I already gave him the power to do this? She didn't answer right away. She just took my hand and squeezed it. "Then we'll find out. And if he forged anything, we'll expose it." I stared at her fingers wrapped around mine. Strong, warm, steady. A lifeline in a sea of betrayal. I nodded slowly. "Okay, let's see what we can dig up." She smiled, proud and fierce. "That's the spirit." I leaned back in the chair and exhaled long and hard. I thought I raised him better than this. "You did," she said gently. "But some people choose the easier road even when they've been shown the right one. That's not on you." Later that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the two folders spread open before me. I flipped through the old documents, each one a reminder of every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. My own handwriting, my own signature used like currency in a game I didn't know I was playing. I thought about Liam's face when he was a boy, the way he'd run to me after school, his backpack swinging wildly. That child was gone, replaced by a man who thought manipulation was a form of love. I took a pen from the drawer, wrote Tom's name and number at the top of a clean notepad, and circled it. The silence in the house wasn't comforting anymore. It was loaded. But for the first time in a long while, I felt something stirring inside me, not anger, not grief, but focus. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. And I wouldn't be the one blindsided this time. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops, I found myself hunched over the same kitchen table, sorting through papers that smelled of old ink and regret. I hadn't slept much, but my mind was sharp, my focus locked in. Ellen had kept her word. Tom was already looking into Liam's financial records. But there was something I needed to do alone, something I'd been avoiding for years. In the hall closet, shoved behind a box of mismatched batteries and dusty Christmas ornaments, was an old shoebox. I pulled it out carefully, like it might bite. Inside were letters. Real letters. Liam's handwriting on every envelope back when he still used pen and paper, back when he still called me Dad, without needing anything attached. I hadn't opened that box in over a decade, but now the pages felt heavier in my hands than I remembered. I spread them out one by one. The tone shifted as the years went on. Early letters were warm, even apologetic. "Thanks for helping with the down payment. I'll pay you back soon, promise." Then came the entitled ones. "Need you to co-sign. It's urgent. Just sign it and I'll handle the rest." That one I remembered, vividly. I'd been working late nights, exhausted. He came by, smiled like he always did, and dropped the paperwork on my kitchen counter. I never read it. I just signed. I felt sick. My name had probably been on more documents than I even realized. And if Tom was right, if Liam had tied me to shell companies, defaulted loans, forged extensions, I could be in far deeper than I ever imagined. One letter caught my eye. It was dated a few weeks before his wedding. Short, rushed handwriting. "Just sign the papers, Dad. It's for the business. No big deal." I'd thought nothing of it at the time, but now it glowed like a warning flare. I took a photo of it with my phone, then sent it to Ellen. She replied almost instantly, "Tom needs that. It's a pattern." I gathered every letter, scanned them one by one, documenting every promise, every manipulation. My hands trembled as I worked, not from fear, but from the weight of truth sinking in. I had built a wall of trust around Liam and convinced myself it was love. But it had only ever been scaffolding for him to climb higher, while I stayed grounded, holding the base. My chest ached not with sadness, but with realization. These letters weren't just paper. They were confessions, evidence of a son who saw a father not as a man, but as a solution. I slipped them into a new folder, labeled it by hand Liam, Financial Promises, and placed it beside the original mortgage folder still sitting untouched. For a long moment I stared at both side by side. One was a demand. The other a record of devotion turned debt. I turned off the lights and stood at the window watching snow fall gently across the yard. I'd always told myself I was just doing what any good father would. But maybe good fathers also know when to say enough. And this time I was done letting guilt write the checks. Ellen picked me up around 10 the next morning. Her car smelled like cinnamon and engine grease, a strangely comforting combination. She didn't talk much on the drive, just kept one hand steady on the wheel and the other cradling her thermos. I held the folder in my lap, fingers tapping against the manila edge. When we pulled up outside Tom's office, it was exactly what I'd expected. No polished glass, no modern lobby, just a squat brick building with faded lettering on the door, Private Investigations, Thomas D. Langford. I followed Ellen up the narrow staircase, each creak of the wooden steps, reminding me this wasn't a place for show. This was where things got done. Tom met us at the door, graying, slightly hunched eyes sharp as razors behind steel-framed glasses. His handshake was quick, his voice gravel. "Come in, Rob. Ellen said you've been dragged into something." I nodded and handed him the folder. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He sat behind his cluttered desk, flipping through the pages with surgical precision. "This your son's handwriting?" he asked. "Every word of it," I said. "And your signature?" "Yes." I signed them. Didn't always read them, though. He grunted. "You're not the first. Won't be the last." He scanned further. "Interesting. These loan documents tie to shell corporations out of Delaware and Nevada. Classic move creates a wall between debt and identity. But your name's still on a few of these." I felt the room tilt slightly. "Am I liable?" maybe he said bluntly. "Depends on whether your signature was actually required or just decorative." He reached into a drawer, pulled out a yellow notepad, and started scribbling. "I've seen this before. Young hotshots using their parents' credit like a blank check. But it doesn't take much digging to find the cracks." He paused, tapping his pen. "Sophie. She's tied to this too. Her resume lists experience with firms that don't exist. I ran the references, ghosts. She's been bluffing her way through high-end PR jobs on Charm and Photoshop." I sat back in the creaky chair, the breath leaving my lungs. "So what now?" Tom said. Sliding the folder back across the desk, "You fight smart. They've gone public with accusations, so you go private with facts. Anonymous tip-offs, whisper campaigns. You don't need to scream to be heard. Ellen leaned forward, eyes glittering. Rob, he's saying we don't have to go to war in public. We let the truth do the damage. Tom nodded. I'll set you up with a secure email. Untraceable. You'll send copies of these to Sophie's firm, her old employers, maybe a few news desks. Let them start asking questions. I stared down at the folder at my own signature beside Liam's lies. They counted on me staying quiet. They always did. Tom smiled faintly. Most people do. That's why it works. Until it doesn't. I walked out of that office into the brittle Boston air with the folder tucked beneath my coat and something new burning in my chest. Not revenge exactly. Not yet. But clarity. They had chosen the battlefield. But I would choose how the war was fought, and I wouldn't be outsmarted in my own story. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the lights low, the hum of the old radiator barely warming the silence. My laptop sat on the coffee table fan, whirring like it was nervous. The secure email Tom set up was already open. Anonymous. Untraceable. It felt strange typing without signing my name, but in a way that was the point. This wasn't about me being heard. It was about truth finding its way into the cracks they tried to seal with lies. I attached copies of the scanned letters, Liam's handwritten promises, Sophie's resume with her fake references, the loan agreements tied to defunct companies. Then I typed the message short and precise. Before you trust their story, ask about the debts. Ask about the companies. Ask about her resume. I sent it to Sophie's employer first, then to her past PR clients, a few local journalists, a known industry watchdog. I added one final recipient, an old acquaintance of mine who worked in corporate HR for a major firm in Boston. Not a threat, just facts. It wasn't about ruining them. Not yet. It was about balance. They'd made me out to be selfish and cruel. They'd built that lie on a stage of curated photos and clever captions. All I'd done was pull the curtain. After hitting send, I leaned back into the couch, the upholstery sagging beneath me like old bones. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, cold even. But in that stillness, I knew something had shifted. Somewhere out there, someone was opening that email, reading those attachments, beginning to doubt the story they'd been sold. They thought they could twist the truth and hide behind charm. But charm doesn't survive scrutiny, and scrutiny was coming. The next morning, I checked the inbox. Not the secure one, the regular one. My heart knocked once when I saw Sophie's name. No subject line, just her name. I opened it. It wasn't long. Whatever you think you're doing, stop. We're not afraid of you. Back off or we escalate. I read it twice. Then again, no apology, no explanation, just control wrapped in desperation. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She'd answered a question I hadn't asked. She knew exactly what I'd done. And if she knew, Liam did too. By late afternoon, the backlash had begun. Sophie's firm pulled her public profile from their website. One of the PR blogs I'd contacted posted a vague article about credibility checks in the industry. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it ring. Then another. Then another. I turned it off. I didn't need to hear their voices to know what they'd say. The same lines I'd heard for years, only now dipped in panic. The roles had reversed. For the first time, they were on the defensive. I stood by the window and watched the snow fall light, steady, indifferent. I thought of the years I'd spent enabling Liam's rise, believing it was love. But love without respect is just debt disguised as devotion. And I'd paid long enough. Now it was their turn to answer. The envelope was thick, too heavy for junk mail, too polished to be from a neighbor. My name was printed across the front in bold type. No handwritten warmth, no return address. I knew what it was before I opened it. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning light casting long shadows across the wood. I slit the envelope open with a butter knife and unfolded the first page. The law firm's logo was embossed in the top corner, expensive and smug. I didn't need to read the rest, but I did. They were suing me for $600,000. Breach of verbal agreement, it said. According to the document, I had promised to pay for Liam and Sophie's mortgage and had backed out, causing them severe emotional and financial hardship. The wording made it sound like I'd walked away from my own child in the middle of a hurricane. The legal jargon framed me not as a father defending himself, but as a villain who broke a sacred promise. I laughed. Just once. Sharp and hollow. The audacity was almost impressive. I drove straight to Ellen's. Her house was warm and smelled like fresh bread. She was in the kitchen wearing an apron dusted with flour when I handed her the letter. Her hands stilled as she read. "They're out of their minds," she muttered, her voice clipped and angry. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You okay?" I nodded, though the truth was harder to locate. I expected a counterpunch, just didn't think it would come in a legal envelope. She disappeared into the other room and came back holding her phone. "We're calling Sarah." Sarah was Ellen's friend, a seasoned attorney with a sharp eye for manipulation and a reputation for dismantling baseless claims. By afternoon, I was sitting in her downtown office, the city buzzing outside her frosted windows. Sarah flipped through the lawsuit with quick fingers, her mouth twitching in irritation. "This is weak," she said finally. "They have no documented agreement, no proof, just entitlement dressed up as obligation." I handed her the folder of old letters, the real agreements, Liam's thank you notes, and the photos of the loan documents I'd co-signed. Her expression changed. "These are gold. These contradict everything they're claiming. Especially this one, he thanks you for helping him after the date they say the verbal agreement was made." She leaned back. "You're going to be fine. But we're not just going to defend you. We're going to destroy this narrative." I left her office with the weight in my chest replaced by something sharper resolve. On the sidewalk, I passed a newsstand with Sophie's face on the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Smiling. Perfect. Lying. I stared at the photo for a long moment, then turned away. I didn't need to tear it down. It would collapse on its own. The cracks were already forming, and I had more than enough truth to widen every single one. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat on Ellen's porch, a cup of hot tea warming my hands as the night settled over the neighborhood like a thick quilt. Her old dog Max lay beside me, snoring gently. I watched the wind nudge branches against the railing, feeling the pressure of everything beginning to shift. Ellen came out with her own mug and sat down next to me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Sometimes silence was the only thing that made sense. "They're spiraling," she finally said. "People like Liam and Sophie, once their image starts cracking, it unravels fast. They think a lawsuit will scare you back into silence, but it won't work. You've got too much truth in your corner." I nodded slowly. "I don't want to destroy them. I just want to stop being their collateral." She looked at me for a moment, then said, "You've already stopped. Now it's about protecting your legacy." The word struck something deep. Legacy. I hadn't thought of myself in those terms before. I'd spent my life building things for others, projects at work, a future for Liam, even quiet support for neighbors like Ellen. But I never considered that I'd left anything behind that mattered. Until now. I stood up and walked inside Max, lifting his head but not following. Ellen's living room smelled like cinnamon and old books. I went to the guest room where she'd let me keep the evidence folders and opened the one marked Liam Early Years. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in years. A signed note from his school counselor. Old medical bills I'd covered without question. Postcards from Liam's college days, thanking me for sending money even when he said he was fine. I laid them out on the bed, one by one. Not for legal defense, for clarity. This wasn't just about financial manipulation, it was a pattern. Liam had learned that emotional dependence was a tool, and I had handed him the blueprint. I pulled out a crumpled piece of notebook paper dated nearly 20 years ago. His handwriting was messier then. Thanks, Dad, for working the late shift so I could go on the class trip. I'll pay you back one day. I ran my fingers across the ink like it could still mean something. Maybe it did. Maybe it was a promise he meant at the time. But promises mean nothing when they aren't backed by integrity. And that's what this fight had become, not about money, but about the erosion of character, the quiet theft of dignity, one signature at a time. The next morning, I handed Sarah the new folder. Her eyes lit up when she saw the old documents. This will destroy any verbal agreement claim, she said confidently. This shows years of written acknowledgement that the support you gave was voluntary and finite. I said nothing, just nodded. The past wasn't a chain anymore. It was leverage, and I was finally learning how to use it. As I walked out of her office and into the cold light of a Boston morning, I didn't feel like a victim or a villain. I felt like a man reclaiming his place in the story. On my terms, in my time. The courthouse loomed above me like a monument to every choice I'd made and every line I'd crossed to keep my son afloat. I stood on the steps folder tucked under my arm, dressed in my best wool coat, the one I usually saved for funerals and cold weddings. The morning was sharp wind slicing through downtown Boston, like it had something to prove. Ellen was beside me, her scarf fluttering as she adjusted the strap on her handbag. "You ready?" she asked. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Inside, the air felt heavy. The marble floor echoed with every footstep, each one dragging a history behind it. Sarah met us near the clerk's office, her tone crisp, her hands full of documents and intent. "They're here," she said, without glancing up. "Liam and Sophie. Just saw them walk in with their attorney." I didn't ask how they looked. I didn't care, not anymore. I followed her through the hallways, the walls lined with portraits of past judges and plaques no one reads. The courtroom was cold, all polished wood and quiet tension. I took my seat at the defendant's table, the folder resting in front of me like a shield. When Liam entered, I didn't stand. I didn't smile. He was in a gray suit that looked like it had been picked out for him, not by him. His tie was too tight, his face a shade paler than usual. Sophie followed close behind, perfectly styled but stiff. She clutched her purse like it might float away. They didn't look at me. Didn't need to. The performance wasn't for me. It was for the room. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge entered, an older woman with silver hair pulled tight and reading glasses that hung low on her nose. She looked at both sides like she'd already seen too many of these cases. Her voice was firm. "Let's proceed." Their attorney went first. He painted a picture, Rob, the father who always supported his son, who suddenly withdrew that support during a crucial time. A man who made a verbal promise, then reneged. A betrayal, financial and emotional. I sat still watching as words were twisted into ropes and looped around my name. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood slowly, straightened her blazer, and began laying out the truth, not loud, not showy, just undeniable. She presented the folder of letters, the emails, the financial records. Each piece dismantled the story Liam had sold. "These are not the actions of a man who made a verbal contract," she said. "These are the actions of a father who gave freely for years, who documented his support, who was misled." She handed the judge the note Liam had written 20 years ago. A small thing, but powerful. I didn't look at Liam during her argument. I looked at the judge. Her eyes narrowed as she read the notes, the statements, the inconsistencies in Liam's own financial trail. I knew then that something had shifted. This wasn't just my defense. This was the beginning of their unraveling, and I had brought the thread. Liam took the stand like he was stepping onto a stage. I watched him adjust his collar, smooth his tie, glance once at Sophie before facing the judge. He didn't look nervous, he looked rehearsed. His attorney asked the questions gentle at first, guiding him through the story they'd built together. Liam spoke clearly, carefully, spinning a tale of hardship and betrayal. "My father promised to support us with the mortgage," he said, voice steady. "He always said he'd never let us fall." I sat still, hands folded, heart steady. It was strange hearing my own child speak with such conviction about something that never happened. But that was Liam's gift. He believed the lie while he told it. Sarah rose when it was her turn. She didn't waste time. "Mr. Carter," she began. "When exactly did your father make this verbal agreement?" Liam shifted in his seat. "It was sometime last fall, right after we signed on the penthouse. Was anyone else present?" "No, it was just between us. So there's no recording, no written confirmation. Just your word, yes. But my father has always been generous. This wasn't out of character." Sarah nodded slowly, then walked over to the evidence table and lifted a printed letter. "This is dated 2 weeks after your supposed agreement. You thanked your father for helping with expenses, but you never mentioned a mortgage or ongoing support." "Why is that?" Liam hesitated. "It was just..." "Understood." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Understood. Because here's another letter dated even later where you refer to the mortgage as tight but manageable. You said nothing about expecting your father to pay it." His jaw clenched. "We didn't want to pressure him." "But you're suing him for $600,000, she said, her voice quiet but slicing. "Seems the pressure came later after your own financial issues surfaced." Sophie's name came up next. Sarah didn't pull punches. She presented emails Sophie had sent to her employer with false references, links to shell companies, with no registered employees' expense reports, padded with fake invoices. Sophie shifted uncomfortably at the plaintiff's table, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. Sarah concluded with a simple sentence. "What we see here is not betrayal by a father. It is manipulation by a son who mistook kindness for obligation, and by a daughter-in-law who helped build the illusion." The judge didn't speak for a long moment. She just sat there, flipping slowly through the folder Sarah had handed her. Liam's letters, the timelines, the inconsistencies. I looked across the courtroom and saw something flicker in his expression. Doubt. Maybe even fear. For the first time since this began, I saw the boy I used to know lost behind the man he had become. The judge finally looked up, her voice even. "Mr. Carter, your testimony raises serious concerns about the credibility of this case. We will continue tomorrow with closing arguments." The gavel cracked once, final and echoing. As the room emptied, Liam stood frozen beside Sophie. I walked past them without a word. But I didn't need to say anything. The walls they built on lies were beginning to shake. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove. No destination in mind, just the rhythm of tires on pavement and the sharp Boston wind slicing past the windshield. My mind was loud, replaying every word from the stand, every falsehood Liam had dressed in sincerity. The lies were one thing, but it was the ease with which he told them, the comfort, the confidence that gutted me the most. Somewhere along the road, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just hollow. The kind of hollow that comes after you've accepted that the person you thought you raised never really existed. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a while, staring at the light in the living room window. The same light that had once welcomed Liam home from soccer practice, that had stayed on late during his college breaks. Now it glowed like a witness to everything that had unraveled between those walls. Inside, I made coffee I didn't drink and opened my laptop. I didn't check the news. I didn't look at social media. I opened a folder labeled Liam, Legal. I stared at it for a long time. I'd been collecting facts files receipts, but I hadn't yet written a statement for court. Sarah had said it wasn't required, but it might help. And suddenly, I needed to put the truth somewhere other than my own chest. I typed. Slowly at first, then faster. I didn't dress it up. I didn't use big words. I wrote about raising Liam alone after his mother passed, about double shifts, about taking out loans to cover his schooling, about the time I sold my truck so he wouldn't have to delay his wedding. I wrote about the joy I felt every time he succeeded and the hurt I swallowed every time he disappeared after asking for more. I didn't cry while writing. That had already been done. By morning, the document was printed and placed in a clean folder. Sarah reviewed it in her office eyes, scanning each paragraph with the kind of stillness lawyers reserve for statements that come from something deeper than defense. It's not polished, I told her. It doesn't have to be, she said. It's true. That's all that matters. The courtroom felt different the next day. Tighter. Quieter. The press had caught on. A local news outlet had picked up the financial inconsistencies. Sophie's employer had suspended her pending an internal review. I didn't gloat. I didn't even feel relief. Just a sense of gravity settling in the room. Sophie sat stiff in her seat, eyes straight ahead. Liam looked tired. Not just in the way a man loses sleep, but in the way someone realizes the ground beneath them isn't solid. Sarah submitted my written statement into evidence. The judge read it silently from the bench, her face unreadable. When she looked up, her voice was clear. We will resume with closing arguments tomorrow. But let me be clear, this court will not tolerate manipulation disguised as familial expectation. I stood as court adjourned. Liam turned to me in the aisle, eyes searching, lips parted like he might speak. But I walked past him again. If he had something to say, he should have said it before dragging me into a courtroom. The next morning, I ironed my shirt for the first time in months. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to feel like I was standing tall when the truth finally landed. Ellen picked me up just after 7. She didn't say much during the drive, just handed me a travel mug of coffee and let the quiet fill the space where worry used to live. We arrived early before the courthouse even opened to the public. Sarah was already there, reviewing her notes with the focus of someone who knew the finish line was near, but refused to look up until she crossed it. By the time court was called into session, the gallery was fuller than usual. A few local reporters sat in the back with notepads. Sophie's employer had quietly sent legal counsel to observe. Even Liam's old college friend Marcus was seated along the side wall, arms crossed, brow furrowed, watching the case unfold. When the judge entered the room, snapped into silence. "We will now hear closing arguments," she said firmly. "Counsel, proceed." Liam's lawyer went first. His tone was softer now, his confidence worn thin. He tried to reframe the case as a miscommunication, a tragedy of crossed expectations between generations. "My clients acted out of trust," he said. "They believed in a promise, however informal. They made decisions based on that belief. But his words no longer landed. The room didn't shift. No one leaned forward. Everyone had heard enough. Then Sarah stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even move far from the table. She just spoke the way a good lawyer does when she's already won the argument. "This case is not about legal misunderstanding," she said. "It is about a father's trust being twisted into an open vault. It is about decades of support being erased by entitlement." Mr. Carter gave freely, repeatedly, and without condition, until the condition became coercion. She gestured to the evidence one last time. "The documents are clear. The timeline is consistent. And the emotional manipulation is undeniable. There was no contract. Only assumption. And that assumption ends today." She sat down without another word. And for a few moments, the room was absolutely still. The judge closed the file on her desk and looked directly at Liam and Sophie. "I will take this case under advisement and issue my ruling tomorrow morning, but let me say this clearly: what I've read and heard does not paint a picture of injustice. It paints a picture of ingratitude and fabrication." Her gavel hit once. The sound felt like the crack of something breaking open. Outside the courtroom, reporters began circling. I didn't speak to them. I didn't owe them anything. Ellen shielded me with her presence, one hand on my back as we walked down the steps. At the bottom of the stairs, I turned and caught a glimpse of Liam. He wasn't with Sophie anymore. He stood alone, looking down at his phone like it might give him answers. There were none left to find. I stepped into Ellen's car and closed the door behind me. Tomorrow the court would speak its final word. But in my heart, the verdict had already arrived. I had told the truth, and the truth had stood its ground. The morning of the ruling, I arrived early and alone. Ellen offered to come, of course, but I needed this one to be mine. No support, no shield. Just me standing in the aftermath of everything I'd carried and everything I was about to put down. The courtroom was quieter than usual. A few observers remained, including a young reporter scribbling in a notepad. Liam was already seated, staring ahead with blank eyes. Sophie wasn't there. I didn't ask why. I didn't care. Sarah greeted me with a firm nod. "It's going to be clean," she whispered. "The law's on our side, and so is the evidence." I gave her a tight smile and took my seat, the manila folder still resting in my lap like armor. When the judge entered, I sat up straighter than I had in years. My back didn't even ache. My breathing was even. My pulse was calm. I was no longer afraid of what would happen. I had already survived the worst of it, the betrayal, the humiliation, the public smearing. This was just the final chapter. The judge read from her notes slowly, her voice steady but firm. After reviewing all evidence presented, the court finds no credible support for the plaintiff's claim of a verbal agreement. No written documentation, no corroborating witnesses, and no financial trail suggest that such a promise was made or broken. Conversely, the defendant has provided extensive documentation indicating years of voluntary support, clear boundaries, and consistent behavior. She paused, looked at Liam, then at me. The court dismisses the case in full. No damages awarded. All legal fees are the responsibility of the plaintiffs. Her gavel cracked down with a finality that echoed through my ribs. I exhaled, not in relief, but in release. Liam didn't move. He sat there for a long moment, jaw clenched, staring at the judge like he couldn't process what she'd just said. I didn't wait for him to stand. I didn't look back. I gathered my folder and walked out of the courtroom into the light of a clear Boston morning. The sky was pale blue, the city moving forward, like it hadn't even noticed my little war. Ellen was waiting outside on the courthouse steps holding a thermos and a newspaper. She stood when she saw me and smiled before I even spoke. "It's over." I nodded. "It's over." And we won. She handed me the thermos without a word. I took a long sip, letting the heat settle somewhere deep inside my chest. It wasn't coffee. It was chamomile. Comfort in liquid form. She knew me too well. Across the plaza, I saw Liam step out into the sunlight, alone. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the suit no longer fit right. For a brief second, our eyes met. And I saw it, the recognition, the regret, the ruin. He opened his mouth like he might say something, but I turned before he could. Whatever he had to say, it was years too late. I walked away from the courthouse without fanfare, without victory speeches, without any need for closure from a son who had tried to take everything. The law had spoken. My name was cleared. And now I was finally free to start again. The day after the verdict, I slept in for the first time in years. No phone ringing before sunrise, no tension in my chest, pulling me awake before the light broke. I woke to stillness. Real stillness. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from peace. The kind that says you're no longer waiting for the next blow. The house felt different too. Not bigger or brighter, just mine again. I made breakfast without rushing, fried 2 eggs and buttered toast, the way I used to on Sundays when Liam was a kid. The radio played something soft in the background, a song I couldn't name, but one that didn't ask for anything. For once, nothing asked for anything. The manila folders still sat on the kitchen table, but they didn't feel like shields anymore. They felt like records history, not ammunition. I considered burning them. I even gathered them in my hands and walked toward the fireplace. But halfway there, I stopped. Not out of sentiment, not out of fear, but because I realized they didn't need to be destroyed. They needed to exist, as reminders, as boundaries, as proof to myself that I hadn't imagined it all. That it wasn't just exhaustion or guilt that made me see how far things had gone. Around noon, Ellen dropped by with 2 sandwiches and a 6-pack of ginger beer. She didn't ask if I wanted company. She just came in, took off her coat, and opened the fridge like she'd always belonged. "Brought lunch," she said, like it was any other Thursday. I smiled genuinely. "You always show up at the right time." "I'm old," she shrugged. "Timing's all I have left." But the way she looked at me said she had more than timing. She had presence. And she knew what it meant to stand next to someone when the dust settled. We ate in the living room, plates balanced on our laps, window cracked just enough to let in the cool air. So she said what now I didn't answer right away. I looked around at the house. The photo still sat on the mantel, the one of Liam as a boy with his arms around my neck, grinning through a gap in his front teeth. I didn't turn it down. I didn't throw it away. I just let it sit. I'm not sure I finally said, but I know what I'm not doing anymore. Ellen nodded. She didn't press. She didn't need to. She just reached over, tapped my hand with 2 fingers and said, "You've got time. Use it how you want." That night, I took a long walk through the neighborhood. Snow crunched beneath my boots. Christmas lights still hung on some porches, flickering gently, like they'd forgotten the season had already passed. I walked past houses where I'd fixed fences, repaired gutters, lent out tools. I passed the school Liam had attended, the grocery store, where he used to beg for candy. Each place held memories, but none of them hurt anymore. They were just echoes. And for the first time in a long while, I let those echoes fade without chasing them. The following week passed without drama. No emails, no calls, no lawyers knocking on the door. Just the hum of a regular life beginning to stitch itself back together. It was strange at first. After months of bracing for impact, calm felt unfamiliar. I found myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Liam to send some final message laced with guilt, or Sophie to spin another story online. But nothing came. Not even a whisper. I started taking walks every morning, same loop around the neighborhood. The houses hadn't changed, but something in the way I looked at them had. I noticed details I'd ignored before: the chipped paint on the gray house at the corner, the way the McCarthy boy left his bike in the driveway every night, like a dare to the snow, the smell of cinnamon from the bakery that opened at 6 sharp. I waved at neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, and they waved back not out of pity, but familiarity, as if the dust had settled around me and I was visible again. Ellen stopped by more often, sometimes with dinner, sometimes just to sit. One evening, she brought an old photo album from her attic, the kind with plastic sleeves and handwritten notes under each picture. We sat at the kitchen table, flipping pages, trading stories. I told her about Liam's first fishing trip, how he dropped the rod into the lake and cried for an hour. She laughed so hard her glasses fogged up. I hadn't heard that sound in my kitchen in a long time. At one point, she leaned back and said, "You know what I admire about you, Rob?" I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't let it make you bitter. Angry, sure. Hurt, definitely. But not bitter. You still see the world like it might be good again." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't thought of it that way. I still carried the scars, but maybe I wasn't carrying the poison anymore. Later that night, after Ellen had gone and the house was quiet again, I sat on the front steps with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The stars were out clear and sharp. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had refused to lose. My sense of self, my integrity, my voice. I thought about how Liam and Sophie had once believed they could twist all of that into something they could control, something they could profit from. But they'd underestimated the strength it takes to simply stand firm. Inside the house, the folders were still tucked away, not destroyed, but no longer in view. I didn't need them to remind me anymore. The weight was gone, not because it disappeared, but because I'd finally set it down. I took a deep breath and watched it curl out in the cold air like steam, rising from something no longer boiling. I wasn't sure what came next. I just knew it would be mine to decide. News of the court's decision spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, Liam and Sophie were no longer the golden couple they'd curated online. Sophie's social media accounts went private after a few quiet days of radio silence, then disappeared altogether. No more rooftop brunch photos. No more captions about loyalty and legacy. Just a blank page where their image used to live. I didn't have to look for updates, they came to me. Ellen kept her ear to the ground, and Tom still had friends in places that mattered. Sophie's employer didn't fire her outright, but they suspended her without pay, pending further review of qualifications. It was a polite way of saying, "We found the lies. Now we're deciding how to clean them up." Liam wasn't faring much better. According to a friend of Ellen's son, Liam had been let go from a consulting contract due to internal discrepancies. More smoke. More quiet collapse. Still, I felt no joy in hearing it. No satisfaction. I didn't want them to fail. I just wanted them to stop taking from me. And now that they had nothing left to gain, they seemed to be doing what entitled people often do when exposed. They disappeared into themselves. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that they'd put the penthouse on the market. Too much overhead, the agent had said. Not sustainable without external support. I smiled at that just a little. One afternoon, while I was trimming branches in the backyard, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it ring out, then checked voicemail. It was Liam. His voice was tight, not angry, but restrained, like he was trying hard not to let something slip. Dad. I know you're probably not in the mood to talk, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how it all went, for everything. I wish we'd handled it differently. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I replayed the message twice, then I deleted it. Some might call that cold, but I wasn't interested in apologies whispered after consequences. I had opened my door for years, answered calls at midnight, signed papers I didn't read because I believed in the promise of family. And that promise had been broken not once, not twice, but systematically, piece by piece. One voicemail wouldn't patch that back together. That kind of repair takes years, if it takes at all. That night I sat on the porch and reread a letter I had almost thrown away during the worst of it, a simple Father's Day card from years ago. Liam had written, "Thanks for always showing up, Dad." That part hurt more than any legal document, because I had shown up every single time, until the day I couldn't afford to anymore. Not financially, not emotionally, not spiritually. They'd built a castle on favors and appearances, but the foundation was hollow, and now it was cracking. I didn't swing the hammer that brought it down. I just stopped holding it up. The following Sunday, Ellen invited me over for dinner. Her kitchen smelled like roast chicken and rosemary, warm and comforting in that quiet way only time and care can produce. The radio was playing soft jazz and the table was already set for two. I brought dessert, something from the bakery down the street that still remembered my name, and she lit 2 candles like we were expecting company, even though we both knew it would just be us. We didn't talk about Liam or Sophie that night. Not once. We talked about the neighbor's broken fence, about whether her radiator was making a new noise, about a book she wanted me to read. And somehow that meant more than any apology ever could. Normalcy, I realized, is a kind of healing too. The world continuing with or without drama was its own quiet redemption. After dinner, we sat on her porch, wrapped in wool blankets, mugs of tea warming our hands against the early spring chill. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "you could go somewhere. Just for a bit. Change the view. Shake the dust." I chuckled. "You trying to get rid of me already?" Hardly she smiled. "But I think maybe it's time you do something for you. Not for a son, not for a house, not for a courtroom. Just for you." The idea stayed with me long after the dishes were cleaned and the porch light was turned off. Later that night, back at my own house, I sat at the dining table and pulled out a notepad I hadn't touched since before the lawsuit. I wrote down one simple line: "What do I want now?" The question didn't scare me like I thought it would. In fact, it felt overdue. Over the next few days, I found myself moving differently. I repainted the front door, not because it needed it, but because I wanted something new to look at. I cleared out the hall closet, finally tossing the box of tangled wires I swore I'd get to eventually. I booked a train ticket north for a weekend trip along the coast. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to remind myself that the world is wide and still mine to see. I never responded to Liam's voicemail. I didn't block him. I didn't erase his number. I just let it sit, like an unopened letter. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting. I just wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. But I'd left the metaphorical porch light on, not brightly, not flashing, but lit just enough to say, if you ever want to come back with honesty, with no strings and no performances, then maybe we'll talk. Until then, I'll be here living, not just surviving. Ellen stopped by again that Friday. She brought her garden gloves and said she wanted to help me prep the backyard for spring. We didn't talk about grief or betrayal or justice. We just talked about flowers. And for once, that was enough. Life didn't need to be louder than that. It just needed to be real. Spring was in the air. The days grew longer, the snow melted into soft patches of mud, and the first green shoots appeared in my garden. I found myself spending more time outside, leaning on the old wooden fence, watching the neighborhood come back to life. Ellen was right. Change was possible, even if it didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, steady process, like a tree pushing through the earth. I started taking small steps toward rebuilding what had been broken inside me. I signed up for a woodworking class at the community center, not because I needed a hobby, but because I wanted to build something with my own hands. The smell of sawdust, the rhythm of hammer against nail, it grounded me in ways words couldn't. I met people there who didn't ask about my past or my son's lawsuit. They just saw me as Rob. Not a defendant, not a victim, just a man learning new skills. Ellen and I grew closer not as lovers or saviors, but as two people who'd survived storms and found shelter in each other's company. We shared dinners, stories, and sometimes comfortable silences. She was the kind of friend who reminded me that life could be simple without being empty, that laughter could heal wounds, silence couldn't reach. I didn't hear from Liam again, not a call, a message, or an apology. I stopped waiting. I wasn't sure if that door was closed forever or just ajar, but I was done standing in the hallway, hoping for it to open. Instead, I focused on what I could control: my own happiness, my own peace. One afternoon, while working on a birdhouse for the community garden, I caught sight of a group of kids playing down the street. Their laughter was pure and unburdened, a reminder of the innocence I wanted to reclaim. I smiled to myself and thought maybe this was my second chance not to fix the past, but to build a future I could be proud of. The folders of lawsuits and broken promises still lived in a box tucked away in the guest room. They were no longer weights dragging me down, but reminders of strength I hadn't known I had. I was no longer defined by what I lost, but by what I was choosing to become. If this story has touched you in some way, please like this video, subscribe to the channel Family Betrayal Unmasked, and share your own experiences in the comments. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? How did you find your way back? Your story matters, and together we learn and heal. Thank you for listening. This story is a reminder that love and sacrifice have limits. Being a parent does not mean giving away your dignity or your future. Sometimes the greatest act of love is setting boundaries and standing firm even when it hurts. If you are a parent who has been taken for granted, or someone caught in the web of family expectations that feel unfair, remember that your worth is not measured by how much you give, but by the respect you demand. Healing comes not from endless giving, but from reclaiming yourself. Thank you for listening and sharing in this journey of strength and quiet justice.